This is Democracy Watch. So, Mark, we have some more really promising news out of Ohio. The Ohio Ballot Board has approved the Ohio Independent Redistricting Ballot Initiative, which means groups can start collecting signatures to put the measure on the ballot for 2024. So, what would this mean for the prospect of fair maps in Ohio if it passes?
Oh, it'd be great. It would mean that we take politicians out of the redistricting process, which would be an enormous benefit. I mean, let's just start with the fact that every effort to have the Republicans in Ohio to do the right thing about redistricting has led them to do the wrong thing. You know, let's not pass over the fact that there was a prior redistricting reform in Ohio that led to the redistricting process they have. And when they violated that, they kept ignoring court orders. So what this would do is it would create a 15-member commission consisting entirely of citizens. We get rid of those politicians, the politicians who simply wouldn't abide by the Ohio Supreme Court's prior orders. And you know, the idea here is it would cover different geographies, different demographics of the state, and it would bar political party officials, lobbyists, large donors. It would really be a major reform for a state that desperately needs it.
I may be overly cynical here, but how do you compose a commission that actually does what the voters asked for, which is to produce a fair set of maps, instead of kind of devolving into the partisan chaos that I think we all would otherwise expect it would devolve into?
Look, there are states that do it. You know, your home state of California, you know, has a citizen-led redistricting commission, and there was a lot of skepticism that it was going to work. You know, how is a state as big and complicated as California with all of the geographies and demographies? How are these maps going to be drawn by citizens who have no history in drawing maps? Well, you know what? It's actually worked pretty well for California.
Yeah.
You know, Democrats could get a lot more seats if it was gerrymandered by the legislature. But you know, I think most people would say that the California system has been a success. What has not been a success is the Ohio system. So you always have to say, compared to what, right? The new system, you can say all the reasons why the new system may not be perfect, but compared to what? Compared to the current process that led to partisan gerrymandering, that the state Supreme Court kept striking down over and over again. You know, if you haven't read on Democracy Docket all of the cases involving what happened in Ohio, you really should, because it shows how big a failure that process was.
And by the way, for anybody watching right now who's not yet signed up for Democracy Docket, I'll put the link right here on the screen. It's the free news outlet Mark founded to focus on everything voting election. It's a great resource. So again, sign up for that outlet if you're not yet signed up. Mark, can you speak about the Independent Redistricting Commission that is currently in place in Ohio and the extent to which it's been a failure?
What a joke. I mean, it's not just a joke. You know, we sometimes talk about political theater as being a cynical joke because it doesn't yield what it's supposed to. This is worse than that. This was a political process driven by contempt. It was driven by contempt for the voters. It was driven by contempt for fair districts, and it was driven by contempt for the courts, because this was a 7-member commission consisting entirely of politicians or individuals appointed by politicians. The Republicans had a 5-2 majority on it. It included the Republican governor, the Secretary of State, Frank LaRose, and various state officials. And what we saw is that they passed gerrymandered maps that violated the state constitution. They were told that by a Republican-controlled Supreme Court over and over and over and over and over again. 5 times they were told this, and they just refused to follow the law. So it's about time that we put that process in the dustbin of history and we replace it with something that has a chance of really delivering relief to the voters of Ohio.
Well, if this passes, you know, we've already seen how Ohio Republicans have been hostile to both the pro-choice ballot measure that was just passed and the marijuana legalization measure that was just passed. So what could Ohio Republicans do to a measure establishing an independent commission here?
So look, if there's one thing we have learned from Republicans when it comes to redistricting, is they will do anything. They have no shame. To say they are shameless gives them more shame than they actually have. They have negative shame. They're willing to do anything. Look at what they did in Alabama for over 1 congressional seat. They defied a federal court order. Look at what they did in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, they were going to impeach a justice who had never ruled on anything simply to prevent fair redistricting. In Ohio, we saw them, as I mentioned, several times ignore state orders there. Now, that's the baseline that they come into, but this is not just some ordinary Republican state. How many times did you and I, Brian, talk about what they were doing to try to frustrate the pro-choice ballot initiative? They tried to raise the threshold. They tried to prevent the language from being accurate. They tried to have a August election, right? Then after it passed, they are threatening to strip the courts of the ability to implement it. So if they're willing to do that over choice, and they're willing to do it over marijuana legalization, just imagine what they'd be willing to do when it comes down to how the lines are drawn that involve their seats. Yeah. We have to be ready, everyone. We have to be ready to fight Republicans from one end of this to the other. That's why Democracy Docket covers this. This is why you and I talk about it. And it's why the lawyers are ready to go.
Mark, what would the relationship be between this citizen-led commission and the state courts? Because we've already seen how far right this Ohio Supreme Court is and what they're willing to allow for the benefit of the state GOP.
So look, I have to assume that the Ohio Supreme Court will enforce the pro-marijuana ballot initiative, will enforce the pro-reproductive rights ballot initiative, and that they would enforce this. Now, we're going to get a good preview of that, because I think, Republicans are going to do everything they can to prevent the implementation of the first two. But I until proven otherwise, I believe that a clearly drawn, unambiguous ballot initiative in Ohio would not run into problems with the state Supreme Court. Now, we might see Republicans bring back up the independent state legislature fringe theory. They're doing that right now in Michigan over that state's commission, even though they just lost a case involving this out of North Carolina in the Moore v. Harper case. It would not shock me if that happened, but I think that the state courts would reject it.
And by the way, if they did bring up the independent state legislature theory again, and it was appealed to the Supreme Court, wouldn't logic suggest that the Supreme Court would rule in the exact same way that they've already ruled on pretty much the exact same case in Moore v. Harper?
Yes, but this is the tactic of the right. This is their tactic, is they don't believe there is any such thing as stare decisis or settled precedent. Roe v. Wade had been settled precedent not just for 40 plus years. It had been settled precedent that had been reaffirmed over and over and over again. They don't care about precedent. They're just going to keep trying until they get the composition of the court, or they get the case that they think they can push through their radical theories to unwind democracy. Look at what they're doing. We talked on an earlier episode what they're doing around Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. The Voting Rights Act passed in 1965. They're still attacking it in 2023. So I'm going to assume that they're going to keep doing that, but I think that they're not going to have success in the short term for sure with the current Supreme Court on ISL.
Okay, well, obviously all of this underscores the importance of the courts and that the work that you and your team are doing to protect democracy. So for anybody watching right now, to support Mark and his team, please sign up again for Democracy Docket. It's that free news outlet Mark founded to focus on everything voting and elections. The link is right here on the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Teller Cohen.
And I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.